Hello! I'm so glad to talk to you today about Burgundy's female heroes. We tend to think of Burgundy as wine, but the more we learn about Burgundy, the more intriguing this study becomes. I want to give you a sense of Burgundians by talking about 4 legendary women from 4 different points in time. And I want to touch upon the tradition of decorating heroes like them with gold. Let me mention, too, that looking at Burgundy may give us insights on both a micro and macro scale. Through these 4 women, we may also get a glimpse of Europe's early system of family domains, as well as its Norse heritage. Where is Burgundy? Different places have been known as Burgundy at different times, and Burgundians are scattered all over the world. Right now, Burgundy is a department of France, but that's not where the capital of the Burgundian family domain used to be. The stories of our 4 women here occurred in what is now France, Germany, and Belgium. So we'll start with the Vic's treasures in France that were found between Burgundy's current capital, Dijon, and the town of Troyes, famous for its medieval champagne fairs. A wonderful museum near there contains the Vic's treasures of pre-Christian Iron Age artifacts that were found in this area in a tumulus, a large underground burial chamber. Recent DNA tests have shown that the body in the tumulus was a woman. Until then, the grave was identified as a nobleman's grave. Among the treasures in the tumulus is this golden torque, and I want to show you how superbly it was crafted by magnifying it. The fine detail of the gold work on this torque reflects a population that knew how to mine and work gold with remarkable expertise. This quality suggests a stable population that developed skills over time. Gold occurs throughout Europe. As archaeology uncovers ancient gold, we can see that the early Europeans were specialists, not only in mining, but also in smithing gold. This seems to have been true from Eastern Europe to the British Isles. Prehistoric Europeans knew their gold, and they knew their wine. I want to show you this enormous wine vessel that was also found among the treasures of La Dame de Vix. Not only does it establish a broad conversance with wine production in the Iron Age before the Roman invasion, it also gives an idea as to the way death was treated and how loved ones were honored. It almost seems as though this woman, who lived more than 2,000 years ago, is sharing a joke with us today. She's watching her own funeral procession with bemusement. One additional observation here: the technology required for making the Vic's treasures, working the gold, making the wine, and crafting the huge wine vessel, these are much more advanced than we usually think of ancestral Europe before the Roman Empire. Let's move ahead now from Vic's to the next legendary Burgundian woman who lived within the time of the Roman Empire, after the Roman invasion. In those days, Europe was likely composed of family domains. The capital city for the Burgundian family was in the Rhineland. Let's look at the old Burgundian family capital of Worms within the context of waterways, because water carved pathways through Europe as well as sustaining ancient settlers. The Rhine-Danube corridor acts as a thoroughfare across all of Europe. the sources for the Rhine and the Danube are an easy portage apart. Some of the slopes along the Rhine are steep before the river fans out onto the plains of the wine road. Old ruins in narrow canyons remind us of the threat of attack and the need for refuge castles. These vertical vineyards, though extremely hard to cultivate and harvest, produce some of the world's best wines. Perfect slopes for wine are still known in some places by their Celtic word, breg. The fertile plains of both the Rhine and Danube evidence long human habitation here. Ancient knowledge of hydrology that centers on those rivers is becoming more and more apparent with archaeological excavations. The wine cellar traditions out of the Rhineland also show deep roots because we see ancient underground wine cellars in reconstructions of pre-Roman villages. But now I want to talk about our Rhineland hero, Kriemhild. A heroic epic was written about her and her hometown on the Rhine. Do you know the Nibelungenlied? It was the inspiration for Tolkien's Lord of the Rings trilogy and a Wagnerian opera called The Ring of the Nibelungen. One of Wagner's 4 music dramas is even called Das Rheingold. The story of the Nibelungenlied revolves around Kriemhild. A Roman soldier killed Kriemhild's husband Siegfried, causing Kriemhild to mount a military campaign against the Romans to avenge her husband's death. This Burgundian battle against the Romans probably took place in the first 3 centuries of the Common Era. Although the Burgundians lost that battle, Europe's families apparently won the war because the Romans were expelled from Europe during the 5th century, which we think of as the fall of Rome. The battle at Trier forced Roman Emperor Constantine to abandon his headquarters there. Accounts of Kriemhild's battle against the Romans, though, was kept alive. One version that survived was not written down until some 7 centuries after the battle. That account was written in the German language, and it was not until I went to the museum in Worms that I found out that Kriemhild was Burgundian and not German. In college, I was taught that the Nibelungenlied was the first German literature. The capital city of the Burgundian family at one time was Worms, on the Rhine River. Nearby Trier, the capital of the Treveri family domain, sits on the Mosel that flows into the Rhine. Freeing the city of Trier was vital to all of Europe. Why? Romans treated native Europeans as possessions to be owned by Roman masters. Roman soldiers were all male and they were paid in gold, land, and slaves. Rome wanted Europe's gold and its vineyards, but also Rome wanted to enslave Europeans for their superior capabilities. Romans didn't have the technology that Europeans did in mining, winemaking, science, engineering, or building. Could I take just a minute to talk about Roman law, how it applied differently to different types of people? I think this is crucial to understand because it's written in black and white and explains a lot about Europe's past. Archaeology is showing that life under Roman imperial rule was much different than life in Europe's family domains, especially for women. Looking at what happened in Europe before and after Rome fell can show how ancestral families fared in Europe under imperial rule and out from under it. Roman citizens had superior rights and only men could become citizens. When Romans took over, they treated Europeans as slaves on their own lands. So if you were anyone other than a Roman man, you could become their property. This is the Roman imperial Europe that our second Burgundian female, Kriemhild, knew. The Roman Empire imposed male-only fiefdoms on a Celtic Europe that venerated both its women and men. Rome tried to divide and conquer Europe's family culture that mined gold and made wine. Rome fell, the Merovingians took charge. So let's talk about our third female hero, a Merovingian, who led Europe after the fall of Rome. Clotilde was married to a Frank named Clovis. We'll talk more about Clovis a little later, but these two families, the Franks and Burgundians, had acted together to free Europe from Roman imperialism. Then a couple, a Frankish man and a Burgundian woman, served as leaders of Francia together. Who were these Merovingians? Well, let's look at the word. Gian, G-I-A-N, is an ending, so let's chop it off. So we have Merovan left. What word do you recognize in that? Mer is sea, van is wine. What is O? It means of, it's a connector. So we have the Sea of Wine Consortium ruling Europe, right? That's one possible interpretation of Merovan. In addition to their superb metalwork, the Merovingians built castles and fortresses. Women founded and managed numerous centers for education and production that were called abbeys. A few artifacts remain from the Merovingian era. This is a Merovingian gravestone that we saw on our last trip to Burgundy in France in an ongoing excavation. So our third female hero is in the Merovingian era, Clotilde. One of her most outstanding acts was that she built a memorial to a woman named Geneviève. What had Geneviève done to deserve such a tribute? Like America's Paul Revere, she rode from Nanterre to the town of Troyes. Nanterre is just up the Seine River from Paris. Paris was a family capital of the Parisi family, and when Paris had been under attack, Geneviève rallied the troops to defend it. Paris lies about 120 miles northwest of Troyes, and Troyes was an extremely important place in medieval Europe because it was the epicenter of the textile markets. The Champagne fairs began and ended in Troyes every year. Clotilde honored Geneviève in the way that we still honor war heroes, by decorating them with gold. Clotilde's tribute to Geneviève still exists in Paris today, although not in its original form. And here we have a woman creating a remarkable tribute to another woman as a hero in the 6th century, after the fall of Rome. Inside the building, which is now a church next to the Pantheon in Paris, there is not only the tribute to Geneviève, but also the tombs of two 17th century men who are greatly revered in France, Pascal and Racine, a scientist and a playwright. I want to call attention to the ancient practice of interring heroes in the gathering hall. I'll pick up this thread later. Okay, we've been talking about Dame de Vix in the Iron Age, Kriemhild under the Roman Empire, Clotilde the Merovingian in the 6th century. Now let's skip all the way to the 15th century, Marie of Burgundy. And this is an era that's difficult to talk about because for women, 14th and 15th century Europe was horrific. Some historians estimate that hundreds of thousands of women were burned at the stake in those times. Marie of Burgundy was the Duchess of Burgundy, and Burgundy was the last duchy to fall to feudalism, to a Europe that by then had been chopped up into fiefdoms, into kingdoms and principalities. And Marie is a great hero of mine because she saved the library of the Duchy of Burgundy from destruction. She secreted it away to Spain for safekeeping, and that's the only reason that any of the books in that collection still exist today. Let me give a bit of personal background here, because I had become aware of the Dukes of Burgundy when we had a tapestry import business. I had searched in vain for traces of the Dukes of Burgundy, who had been patrons of tapestry. It was very odd, because it seemed as though all traces of the Burgundian tapestry had disappeared. There wasn't even a plaque where hundreds of workshops had flourished in the Middle Ages. Before Europe was splintered into fiefdoms and empires, there had been a system of duchies that were set up mainly for defense. Family domains banded together to produce warriors when under attack. Both men and women led these duchies as dukes and duchesses, and their job was to muster armies. But the headquarters for the Duchy of Burgundy was not in France at this time. The seat of Burgundy was Belgium. I've selected a few examples of what I found in the Duchy of Burgundy Library, which is now in the Royal Library in Brussels, Belgium. I wanted to see what remained in that collection of books that Marie of Burgundy had saved. So we went up to Brussels, I got a library card, and I spent 3 days in the library there. Here are examples that show women participating in various aspects of life, one for each month of the year. This is a tapestry of Amazon women warriors, which is part of a book on Burgundian tapestry. Also in the book on Burgundian tapestry, I found a photo of a tapestry that shows Clovis, whom I mentioned before, and I think this tapestry could be significant. Clovis was the husband of our third hero, Clotilde, in the Merovingian era. And this tapestry is called the Crowning of Clovis. But look at the gray demeanor and the way he's being propped up. I think the tapestry might be telling us that he was dead. If Clovis did die, Clotilde would have been the sole leader. She would have been the one governing Merovingian Francia. We'll leave that mystery for now. I'd like to show you a few more slides to give a sense of Burgundy when Marie of Burgundy led the duchy. This coin was minted during her tenure. Finally, I want you to see traces of the Burgundians in Belgium in addition to Brussels. Fortifications like this one in Ghent likely indicate the seriousness of the threat the Burgundians were facing. Walls, moats, towers, these were all part of staving off enemy attack, and sometimes for years at a time. Today's Ghent preserves its historic layout around a town square where many of the town's main events take place. One major element that we found repeated in all the places associated with the Duchy of Burgundy is hospitals. This is also for another day. Here's a curtain call for the 4 Burgundian women who have been celebrated by their cultures at different times and places in history, and I'm honored to pay tribute to them now. Thank you so much for your attention, and we'll see you shortly, I hope.